Heaven doesn't whisper warnings, heaven issues decrees. When God speaks, the atmosphere doesn't just shift, it rearranges itself. And right now, chosen ones, whether you feel ready or not, the rearranging has already begun. Judgment is not approaching. It has stepped into the room, pulled up a chair, and started calling names like a divine roll call nobody wants to hear. Before we go any further, here's a fact most people ignore. Psychologists have found that when a person has operated in deception long enough, their mind begins to believe their own lies. Now imagine how dangerous that becomes when those same delusional people form cliques, alliances, or little spiritual cults, convinced they can outmaneuver God himself. That alone should be enough to make you clutch your popcorn. And let's be clear, this isn't the kind of judgment where lightning strikes and everyone suddenly repents like a dramatic movie scene. No, this is the kind where God lets the wicked trip over the very traps they set for you, then watches silently as they try to pretend the ground didn't just swallow their plans whole. It's poetic, it's divine, and yes, sometimes it's a little funny, because some of the people who plotted against you really thought God was going to adjust his schedule to honor their foolishness. This season is different. This is where heaven draws a line around you, not a circle of protection, but a circle of authority, and everything outside of it starts malfunctioning. People who once looked organized suddenly can't coordinate their own shadows. Their alliances start arguing with their own lies. Their plotters forget their script. Their gossipers begin confessing by accident. Everything they built in darkness collapses under the weight of God's light, and nothing about it is subtle. Meanwhile, you, the one they counted out, the one they targeted, the one they underestimated, are stepping into a momentum they can't interrupt. They threw everything at you except logic, and now the same God they mocked is rewriting the whole storyline in your favor. Judgment is ensued. The wicked are exposed. The cult is unraveling. And you? You are stepping into the kind of unstoppable rise that makes heaven applaud, and your enemies suddenly remember errands they didn't have. This is not the beginning of your comeback. This is the unveiling of what was already written about you. And trust me, God didn't write your story to end with you defeated. He wrote it to end with them confused, convicted, and completely incapable of stopping you. Number 1. God didn't just expose the wicked. He exposed their dependency on you. The truth that most chosen ones don't realize at first is that the exposure happening in this season isn't simply about revealing who hated you, who gossiped about you, or who plotted against you. The deeper revelation, the one that really stings them, is that God exposed just how dependent they were on the very person they tried to destroy. This is the kind of exposure that cuts through pride, illusions, and fake power. Because when someone is truly strong, they don't need to drain someone else just to stay standing. For years, some of these people pretended that you were insignificant. They acted like your presence didn't matter, like your voice was small, like your gifts were nothing special. But the moment God pulled the curtain back, you finally saw the truth they hoped you'd never figure out. They were feeding off your energy, your kindness, your ideas, your strength, and your resilience the entire time. They were drawing from you like a hidden power source, hoping you wouldn't notice the spiritual, emotional, and even mental withdrawals happening right under your nose. The surprising part is that the exposure didn't come through drama or chaos. It came through absence. When you finally pulled back, detached, grew, healed, set boundaries, or simply outgrew them, their entire system began to malfunction. Suddenly, their confidence shifted. Their behavior changed. Their stability started cracking. They couldn't produce without you. They couldn't inspire without you. They couldn't perform without the energy they had been siphoning. And as embarrassing as it is for them, this season revealed that everything they built was leaning on the strength of someone they once looked down on. That's why judgment is unfolding. Not because you begged God to punish them, but because God had to show you the real dynamic they kept hidden. He had to show you the truth of who was the source and who was the parasite. Once that was established, the tables turned instantly. You walked into clarity, and they walked into consequences. You moved forward, and they ran out of energy because their supply was never theirs in the first place. This season isn't exposing their wickedness alone, it's exposing your worth. And that realization is the very reason you can't be stopped. Number 2, their judgment. Began the day you stopped explaining yourself. There comes a moment in every chosen one's life when something shifts, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet finality that even heaven takes note of. That moment is the day you stop explaining yourself. It's the day you stop breaking down your intentions for people who twist them. Stop defending your character to people committed to misunderstanding you. Stop giving access to people who have no intention of valuing it. That day is more than an emotional milestone. In the spiritual realm, it is a declaration, and it's the exact moment their judgment quietly begins. Wicked people thrive on access. Not physical access alone, but emotional access, mental access, spiritual access. They thrive on having a window into your mind and your heart. They want to know what you're thinking, how you're feeling, and what you're planning, so they can distort it, weaponize it, or use it to their advantage. The ability to pull you into long explanations, circular conversations, or draining interactions is a power they feed on. When you explain yourself, you give them a thread to pull on. When you stop, they lose their grip. What makes this moment so powerful is that you didn't have to announce anything. You didn't send a speech or a warning. You just stopped. You outgrew the need to convince people who never wanted to understand you in the first place. You rose above their manipulation, their guilt tactics, their gaslighting, and their subtle attempts to keep you tied to their control. In heaven's eyes, that moment is recorded as the beginning of separation, where you step out of their influence and God steps in to take over. People don't realize how spiritually serious it is when someone finally reaches the point of silence. Your silence wasn't weakness, it was evidence of growth. It was proof that you had matured past the point where they could provoke you or drag you into their emotional chaos. God honors moments like that, and once He sees that you're no longer entertaining their behavior, He begins holding them accountable for every act they thought they got away with. Their judgment didn't come because you fought back. It came because you stopped playing their game. Without your explanations to hide behind, their characters stood exposed. Without your words to twist, their intentions became obvious. When you stopped explaining, they stopped having excuses, and their downfall started the same day your peace became non-negotiable. Number 3, the cult didn't fear your gift. They feared losing control over the one who carries it. People often assume that the envy and resistance you faced were all about your talent, your intelligence, your potential, or your spiritual sensitivity. But the truth goes deeper than that. Your gift wasn't the real threat. What truly rattled them was the possibility that you might wake up one day and realize you didn't need their approval, their validation, or their system to operate at full capacity. Their fear was never your ability. Their fear was your independence. The moment you step into awareness of your own value, the dynamics shift. When you understand your strength, you no longer chase people who benefit from your confusion. When you understand your calling, you stop allowing others to define your path. And when you understand your power, you stop tolerating environments that shrink you. This is what they were terrified of. The day they could no longer influence what you think, what you believe, and what direction you choose to move in. What made them gather up in groups, whisper in corners, form alliances, or even act cult-like wasn't unity. It was insecurity. Their unity was built on the shared fear that they would lose their grip on you. They saw something in you that you hadn't fully seen yet, a strength that didn't need them, a light that didn't depend on their approval, and a destiny that couldn't be rewritten by their opinions. Once they realized they had no real power over your identity, they panicked. Their goal was to keep you doubting yourself, because a self-assured chosen one is unstoppable. They wanted you second-guessing your abilities, questioning your worth, and staying tied to them emotionally or mentally. If they could control your self-perception, they could control everything else. That's why they manipulated, isolated, gossiped, and tried to make you feel powerless without them. It wasn't hatred, it was fear disguised as hostility. But when God exposed them, He didn't just show their wickedness. He revealed their dependence. He revealed how much energy they put into keeping you unaware of your greatness. And once you stepped out of their grip, their entire structure fell apart. Not because you fought them, but because you were the foundation holding up their false sense of power. The truth is simple. They never feared your gift. They feared the day you recognized that the gift was yours, not theirs to control. Number 4. God allowed their attacks because He needed a public record of their motives. One of the hardest truths for a chosen one to accept is that God will sometimes allow the wicked to act boldly, openly, and without immediate consequences. Not because He favors them, not because He forgot you, and not because He wanted you to suffer. He allowed it because every move they made was building a public record, something undeniable, unmistakable, and impossible for them to talk their way out of when judgment arrived. Heaven does not rule based on whispers, rumors, or assumptions. Heaven rules based on evidence, and the wicked made sure to present plenty of it. Every lie they told about you became part of that record. Every attempt to sabotage your name, your character, your progress, or your purpose added to the file. Every moment you held your peace while they escalated their behavior showed the contrast between your integrity and their intentions. They thought they were destroying you behind the scenes, but they were actually documenting their own downfall step by step. The reason some of their attacks were allowed to continue longer than you expected is because God wasn't collecting information. He was letting them expose themselves. He let them reveal their motives through their arrogance, their jealousy, their obsession, and their desperation. He let them talk, lie, slander, and plot because they needed to show who they really were without the mask. If He had stopped them too early, they would have claimed they were innocent, misunderstood, or victimized. But God gave them enough room to show their true nature without any confusion. And while they were busy digging the hole deeper, you were busy growing. Your patience, your resilience, and your silence became testimonies in your favor. You didn't fight dirty, you didn't retaliate, and you didn't match their behavior. You let character speak for you, and heaven took note of every moment. The contrast between your heart and their actions became so distinct that no one can pretend not to see it now. When judgment arrives, it's never random, it's precise, it's justified, it's irrefutable. God allowed their actions because He wanted there to be a complete record, not just for heaven, but for the world. They can't say they didn't mean it. They can't claim confusion. They can't rewrite the past. They exposed themselves loudly, and now the consequences will be just as loud. They didn't write your downfall. They wrote their own sentencing. Number 5, they didn't want you destroyed. They wanted you unaware of how powerful you already are. The greatest threat to the wicked was never your downfall. It was your awakening. They didn't need you gone. They needed you confused, hesitant, doubtful, and disconnected from your true identity. Their entire strategy was built on keeping you spiritually asleep, because a chosen one who knows who they are is a force they cannot manipulate, distract, or delay. They understood your power long before you did, And that's precisely why they invested so much energy into clouding your vision. People rarely go after what they don't fear. The level of effort they put into breaking your confidence revealed exactly how much authority you carried without even realizing it. They used subtle tactics, mocking your ideas to make you second-guess yourself, twisting conversations to keep you off balance, pretending not to see your growth so you'd think it wasn't real. They acted confused whenever you spoke truth, as if your insight was nonsense, just to make you question your discernment. Every move was intentional, not to destroy you physically, but to make sure you never discovered the power you naturally walk with. Because once you see clearly, you can't unsee. Once you wake up, you don't fall back into the same trap. Once you recognize your strength, their opinions lose importance. They knew the moment you realized your worth, their influence would evaporate like smoke. They feared the day you would stop asking for their approval. They feared the day you would stop shrinking yourself to be accepted. They feared the day you would finally stand fully in the identity God gave you. And that day came. The shift didn't happen because they backed off. It happened because God removed the veil from your eyes. He showed you not only who they were, but who you are. Your clarity became their collapse. The moment your mind aligned with your calling, their manipulation lost all effect. The power they thought they had over you was nothing more than a temporary illusion that depended on your confusion. Once that confusion lifted, so did their relevance. The war ended not when they stopped attacking, but when you stopped doubting yourself. Their entire system was built on keeping you unaware, and the moment you stepped into awareness, everything they built crumbled. They haven't accepted it yet, but the truth is simple. They never had power over you, only over the version of you that didn't know who you were. Number 6. Judgment isn't about revenge. It's about restoring the flow of what was blocked by their hands. The delays you faced in life were never a sign that God was ignoring you or withholding anything from you. The truth is much simpler and much more revealing. The blessings meant for you were tampered with by people who felt threatened by your calling. These were individuals who operated from a place of lack, emotionally, spiritually, and morally. They believed that if they could interfere with your progress, they could somehow make themselves more important, more valuable, or more ahead. Their actions didn't just come from jealousy. They came from the fear that your rise would expose their lack. Instead of growing, they tried to block your growth. Instead of building themselves, they tried to sabotage you. And every time they stepped in front of something God sent your way, an opportunity, a connection, a breakthrough, they weren't preventing the blessing. They were simply holding it in place. Blessings assigned by God do not disappear. They don't get cancelled. They stack. They wait. And when God decides the dam has been shut long enough, He breaks it open in a way that nobody can stop, reverse, or interfere with. That is what judgment really looks like in your life right now. It's not about God striking them down. It's about God rerouting everything they tried to intercept. It's about restoring the flow that was blocked by their insecurity. It's about releasing everything that piled up while they were busy meddling in what was never theirs to touch. Their interference didn't change your destiny. It only created a buildup of blessings that now have no choice but to overtake you. This is why your next season feels intense. The momentum is strong. The shift is obvious. You're not receiving blessings one by one. You're receiving waves of what has been held back for years. Every lie they told, every door they tried to close, every connection they tried to ruin, only added pressure behind the spiritual dam. And once God decided time was up, every wall they built had to break. Judgment is not God getting back at them, it's God giving back to you. It's God restoring everything that was interfered with. It's God making sure you receive every blessing with interest. The The same hands that tried to block your flow are now the reason your blessings are pouring in all at once. God didn't forget you. He was preparing a release they could never stop. Number 7, God let you walk through their darkness, so you could learn the architecture of evil. There are some lessons a chosen one can never learn from books, speeches, sermons, or motivational words. Your calling requires wisdom that can only come from being exposed to what most people run from. That's why God allowed you to walk through environments, relationships, and situations that were darker, heavier, and more draining than anything you ever expected. It wasn't punishment, it wasn't abandonment, it was training. Raw, unfiltered, spiritual training that couldn't be taught from the outside. God needed you to understand the architecture of evil from the inside out. Most people only recognize evil when it becomes obvious. They only notice manipulation when it explodes. They only see betrayal once it's fully matured. But you were trained to see it in its earliest stages. You learned how deception starts small. You learned how manipulation begins with something harmless. You learned how envy masks itself as concern, how control disguises itself as guidance, and how wicked people often present themselves as the most charming individuals in the room. You didn't learn this from theory. You learned it from surviving it. Every confusing moment, every unexpected attack, every strange shift in people's behavior was part of the curriculum God enrolled you in. You learned the patterns of dishonesty. You learned the energy of hidden agendas. You learned to pay attention to tone, timing, silence, and inconsistency. You learned who people become when they think no one is watching. Your spirit became fluent in a language most people don't even know exists. This training didn't just sharpen your intuition, it rewired your entire spiritual perception. It made you someone who can sense motive without evidence, someone who can feel danger before it arrives, someone who can see the trap long before it's set. This is why your discernment is so advanced. This is why certain people can't fool you anymore. This is why manipulation doesn't land the way it used to. God walked you through their darkness until you could recognize evil by its structure, not its appearance. And now that you've learned this architecture, wicked people have lost their advantage. They can't surprise you because you've already seen the blueprint. They can't confuse you because you understand the layout. They can't trap you because you've walked through enough darkness to know every exit, every shadow, and every hidden door. Your training was never about suffering. It was about mastery. And now that you've mastered the architecture of evil, you're stepping into a season where deception has no power over you ever again. Number 8. They tried to break your spirit because they couldn't break your assignment. They thought breaking your spirit would disconnect you from your destiny, but they never understood that your assignment wasn't tied to your emotions. It was tied to your existence. You weren't called to this mission, you were born into it. That means even on your worst day, you're still a threat. Even when you're drained, you're still chosen. Even when you're questioning everything, heaven isn't questioning you. Your enemies miscalculated your wiring. They assumed your spirit operated like theirs, fragile, insecure, shaky, dependent on validation. But your spirit was engineered differently. It carries codes they don't have, endurance they can't replicate, and resilience they can't understand. Your spirit is a blueprint they could never decode, no matter how many times they tried to study you, copy you, or manipulate you. And that's why their attacks failed. They didn't fail because you were untouchable. They failed because your assignment was untouchable. You were covered not because you were perfect, but because you were purposed. They went after your confidence because they couldn't access your covenant. They triggered warfare because they couldn't touch your work. They targeted your mind because they couldn't sabotage your mandate. What they didn't realize is that every attempt to break you only activated more of your calling. Every insult hit your spirit like a reset button. Every betrayal sharpened your discernment. Every loss pulled you deeper into alignment. They thought they were damaging you, but they were actually confirming you. And when God judged them, He didn't judge them for disliking you. He judged them for touching an assignment He never gave them permission to interfere with. Your enemies weren't punished for opinions. They were judged for obstruction. They tried to sabotage what heaven signed off on. They tried to interrupt what was divinely scheduled. They tried to tamper with the destiny of someone who was marked before they were even born. Their attacks awakened your authority. Their cruelty awakened your clarity. Their betrayal awakened your blueprint. Your spirit didn't break. It evolved. It grew teeth. It grew vision. It grew backbone. It grew fire. You're not the same person they tried to break. You're the version of you that exists after heaven intervenes. And that version, unstoppable. Number 9. Judgment was triggered. When you finally outgrew the version of you they could manipulate. Judgment didn't fall because you cried. Judgment didn't fall because you were mistreated. Judgment fell the moment you elevated. The moment you rose into the identity heaven always knew you would eventually step into. The moment you outgrew your old wounds, old patterns, old fears, and old naivete. That's when everything shifted. Because the version of you they were manipulating wasn't the real you. It was the unawakened you. And once the real you emerged, their influence evaporated. Your enemies were never afraid of losing you. They were afraid of losing their ability to control you. They weren't panicking because your life improved. They were panicking because your perception improved. You began to see through the tactics they depended on. You recognized the cycles they used to drain you. You realized the emotional hooks they pulled to destabilize you. Their strategy depended entirely on you staying blind, small, insecure, or loyal to versions of yourself you had already outgrown. But spiritual evolution destroys spiritual manipulation. When God upgraded your identity, every old entry point was sealed. What used to trigger you now bores you. What used to intimidate you now exposes them. What used to confuse you now reveals their intentions with terrifying clarity. Your healing cut off their access. Your growth shut down their permissions. Your elevation disabled their spiritual passwords. And that's what activated judgment. Judgment wasn't simply a response to their behavior. It was heaven's announcement that you have ascended beyond their reach. When they attempted to re-enter your life, they weren't just revisiting the past. They were trespassing. They were trying to access an outdated version of you that no longer exists, and heaven deemed it a violation. They kept chasing the old you because the new you is untouchable. They kept trying to pull you back because the elevated you exposes every lie they built their power on. And God doesn't just judge wicked actions. He judges the audacity of those who attempt to drag His chosen ones back into identities He already delivered them from. You didn't just outgrow them, you evolved beyond the spiritual frequency they operate on. And the moment you did, judgment became unavoidable. Their downfall isn't a reaction to your suffering, it's a reaction to your transformation. Because once heaven updates your identity, anyone who tries to handle you like the old you becomes subject to consequences that were never meant for you, only for those who refuse to accept your elevation. Number 10. The cult's power was an illusion, and your awakening made it collapse. Their strength was never real. It was a performance staged in the dark, relying on you not knowing how much authority you carried. What looked like power was simply coordination. What looked like influence was really insecurity hiding behind numbers. What looked like spiritual dominance was nothing but empty intimidation propped up by secrecy and fear. The moment God awakened you, the curtain dropped, and everything they built started shaking because their entire system depended on you staying asleep. They didn't fear exposure from outsiders. They feared exposure from you. You were the only one who could see through their structure, decode their intentions, and dismantle their tactics without lifting a single finger. And the moment your awareness rose, their power became transparent. Manipulation only works when the target hasn't identified it. Every spell they cast relied on you doubting yourself. Every ritual relied on you staying emotionally vulnerable. Every coordinated attack relied on you being too compassionate to understand the warfare happening behind your back. Your awakening removed the fuel they lived on, the silence you kept, gone, the empathy they drained, reclaimed, the presence they fed on, withdrawn. Without your energy, their system starved. Without your innocence, their strategy collapsed. Without your participation, their hierarchy fell apart. They needed you more than you ever needed them, and judgment revealed that they were parasites masquerading as puppeteers. What they called power was really dependency. What they called unity was mutual fear. What they called strategy was desperation. What they called control was borrowed influence stolen from your unawareness. And God allowed your awakening to flip the entire structure upside down. You became the mirror that showed them the truth. You became the light that revealed their weakness. You became the clarity that exposed their dysfunction. They weren't strong. You just hadn't yet realized you were the one holding their whole operation together. Judgment didn't simply take them down. It revealed that they were already collapsing long before you walked away. Your awareness didn't weaken them. It exposed that they had no real strength to begin with. Their entire empire was built on one fragile condition: you not knowing who you are. The moment that changed, the war ended, the illusion shattered, and everything they built in darkness crumbled under the weight of your awakening. Number 11. God isn't just defending you, He's rewriting the entire narrative. They tried to script for your life. Their version of your story was never meant to stand. They spent years trying to shape how the world saw you, using rumors like ink and manipulation like a printing press. They tried to brand you as unstable, weak, lost, confused, or dangerous. Anything that would keep people from recognizing the light on your life. They didn't just attack your character. They tried to narrate your destiny. But God never gave them publishing rights over your identity, and judgment is His way of repossessing every chapter they forged. They added fear to chapters where God had written courage. They inserted shame into pages where God had written redemption. They tried to replace your progress with setbacks and push a narrative where you never rise, never grow, never become who you were meant to be. But God is stepping in, crossing out their lies line by line, sentence by sentence, until the story they tried to spread evaporates under His truth. This isn't simple defense. This is divine authorship. People who once only heard their version of you are about to witness God's version of you unfold in front of their eyes. The same mouths that reported lies will now have to repeat testimonies. The same ears that absorbed rumors will now hear the truth with clarity. The same people who were comfortable writing you off will now be uncomfortable watching you rise. They thought they were writing your obituary, but God turned it into a preface. Judgment means reconstruction. It means God doesn't just clear your name, He elevates it. It means the narrative they pushed is no longer relevant, believable, or valid. It means the story shifts so drastically that even those who doubted you will question how they ever believed anything else. God is rewriting your identity publicly. He's restoring the reputation they tried to stain. He's deleting the descriptions they tried to attach to you. And He's highlighting the truth they tried to bury under layers of jealousy, insecurity, and projection. You're not just being defended. You're being redefined. The world won't meet the version they tried to create. The world will meet the version God always intended. And that version cannot be lied on, erased, or rewritten by anyone but him. Number 12. You weren't just protected, you were studied by heaven. God didn't watch over you from a distance. He paid attention. There's a difference between being guarded and being evaluated, and heaven wasn't just surrounding you with protection. It was taking note of who you were when nobody was clapping, nobody was helping, and nobody was acknowledging your struggle. Protection kept you alive, but observation recorded your growth. Every silent choice you made became evidence in your favor long before judgment began. When chaos would have been the easier reaction, you chose calm, not because you were weak, but because your spirit refused to be dragged into the dirt with people who lived there. Heaven recorded that. When you could have retaliated and made the wicked regret every word, every rumor, every setup, you instead kept your integrity intact. Not because you were naive, but because your soul knew revenge is a cheap trade for destiny. Heaven documented that too, and when life felt heavy enough to break anyone else, you kept moving forward, even when no one knew how much strength it took just to stand upright. That didn't go unnoticed. Those moments weren't random, they were spiritual qualifications. Your restraint was evidence, your patience was evidence, your endurance was evidence, your compassion, even when given to people who didn't deserve it, was evidence. Heaven studied your reactions the way a king studies the character of the one he plans to promote. God wasn't just counting your tears, he was measuring your maturity. He wasn't just shielding you from evil, he was evaluating how deeply you could be trusted once he elevated you above it. The wicked didn't know that while they were plotting to discredit you, you were building a spiritual portfolio that made their attacks look small, petty, and ultimately pointless. Judgment is not only about punishing them, it's about rewarding you. Those silent battles you fought, the ones nobody knew about, the ones that left you exhausted but still standing, they built a resume that heaven is now unfolding publicly. Your promotion wasn't delayed, it was being prepared. Your blessings weren't missing, they were accumulating. Every private victory became a line on your divine record that now speaks louder than their accusations ever could. You weren't just protected, you were observed, validated, and chosen for what comes next. Heaven didn't just keep you alive, it took notes, and now those notes are turning into rewards. Number 13, their judgment is proof that your next season requires no opposition to advance. There are seasons where resistance becomes a teacher, shaping your grit and sharpening your discernment. But this season isn't one of them. You're stepping into a phase of your life where conflict would only slow down what God intends to accelerate. The wicked weren't judged because you lacked strength. They were judged because their presence would interfere with the speed and clarity of your next assignment. What's coming doesn't require endurance, it requires momentum. God isn't just moving obstacles, he's eliminating anything that would force you to negotiate your progress. Your next level won't be built on long battles, emotional exhaustion, or unnecessary confrontations. It will be built on movement, precision, and rapid growth. That's why judgment feels so sudden. God is clearing the runway so you can rise without turbulence. You're entering a season where the slightest distraction could derail what heaven is preparing to launch through you. Their downfall is not a celebration of your victory over them. It's a confirmation that they were incompatible with your elevation. They were too slow for where you're headed, too chaotic for what you're building, too threatened by the identity you've finally grown into. God saw that if he didn't remove them, they would try to reattach themselves to the parts of you that no longer exist and pull you back into cycles you've already outgrown. This shift is about pace. This breakthrough is about trajectory. This judgment is about environment. God is removing every voice that would have doubted you in moments where speed is essential. He's silencing every hand that would have tried to interfere when precision is required. He's eliminating every presence that cannot breathe in the altitude you're rising to. Your calling is entering a phase where friction isn't strengthening, it's obstructive. Your assignment needs clear skies. Your next chapter won't involve fighting for ground. It will involve occupying new ground faster than the enemy can react. It won't require defending your identity. It will require stepping boldly into it with no resistance slowing your stride. That's why judgment is happening, not because of what they did, but because of what God is about to do through you. Your acceleration doesn't leave room for enemies. Your elevation doesn't leave space for distraction. Your destiny doesn't require their participation or their opposition. The path is being cleared because this time you're meant to fly without anything pulling at your wings. Number 14. You can't be stopped. Because God already finished what they thought they were interrupting. They spent so much time plotting, delaying, interfering and strategizing against you because they truly believed they were blocking something fragile. They assumed your destiny was still under construction, halfway developed, vulnerable, and easy to derail. What they didn't know is that God doesn't start anything He hasn't already finished. Your life wasn't unfolding in uncertainty, it was unfolding in revelation. You weren't chasing victory. You were walking in the direction God had already stamped complete. This is why their attacks never aligned with the outcome they expected. They were throwing stones at a building whose foundation had already been secured in heaven. They were trying to jam doors that God had already labeled as yours. They tried to sabotage a path that was already laid out before you took your first step. They thought they were blocking your progress, but they were only bumping up against a destiny that existed before they did. You can't be stopped because you're not creating a future. You're catching up to one that's already written. You're not fighting for victory. You're unveiling what God already accomplished in realms they cannot access, understand, or undo. That's why every setback became a setup. That's why every delay turned into redirection. That's why every trap they built became the same place God revealed His hand over your life. You weren't being defeated. You were being aligned. To them, your resilience was confusing. To God, your resilience was prophecy unfolding. They expected your breakdown. God scheduled your breakthrough. They expected your downfall. God rehearsed your rise. They expected the story to end in darkness. God already wrote the ending in light. You can't be stopped because the race you're running isn't a competition. It's a confirmation. The moment you showed up in this world, the outcome had already been declared. That's why their warfare was always mismatched. They were fighting a finished script while you were living it out one scene at a time. What they tried to interrupt is something they never had access to. God completed your victory long before they conceived their attacks. So no matter how aggressively they tried to interfere, they were always too late. You aren't fighting for destiny. You are the manifestation of destiny. And destiny can't be stopped by hands too small to touch what God has already settled. When you step back and look at everything God has been doing in your life, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Nothing the wicked built against you had the authority to stand. Not the lies, not the delays, not the coordinated attacks, not the cult-like structures formed to drain you, derail you, or destabilize you. Every single tactic they used only revealed another layer of who you truly are, and every battle they initiated only exposed how divinely backed you've always been. God didn't just protect you. He studied you, shaped you, positioned you, and then elevated you at the exact moment when their power evaporated. You didn't rise because the wicked stopped fighting. You rose because their influence no longer mattered. Judgment isn't just happening around you. It's happening because of who you've become. Every lie they told is collapsing under truth. Every trap they set is collapsing under exposure. Every narrative they crafted is collapsing under the weight of God's authorship unfolding in real time. Heaven used your patience as evidence, your endurance as proof, your integrity as testimony. The wicked thought you were vulnerable, but all along you were being evaluated for a promotion they could never stop. They studied your weaknesses while heaven documented your strength. They rehearsed your destruction while God finalized your destiny. And now, everything they tried to conceal, twist, or sabotage is unraveling. Not because you retaliated, but because God stepped into the room and declared the case closed. This entire journey reveals something even deeper. You were unstoppable the moment God finished writing your story. You weren't surviving attacks. You were outgrowing versions of yourself they depended on. Their collapse was triggered by your awakening. Their judgment was triggered by your evolution. And your elevation was ignited by the truth that finally rose to the surface. You cannot be stopped, because God already established the ending before your enemies even appeared in the story. You're not entering a new season, you're stepping into a fulfilled one. The runway is clear. The opposition has been removed. The narrative has been rewritten. Your blessings are no longer delayed, they are in motion. And the same people who underestimated you will now watch the divine completion of what they tried to interrupt. Your life is shifting publicly. Your identity is being announced spiritually. And your destiny, the one they tried so hard to sabotage, is unfolding with unstoppable force. If this message spoke to your spirit, don't leave without supporting the channel. Make sure you subscribe, like this video, drop a comment, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your engagement helps this message reach the people God intended. Blessings to you, chosen one. Greater is unfolding from here. God bless you.